Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal interesting details on Wednesday, July 9, 2025. First, Lucas felt as if the air had been knocked out of him the moment he read the autopsy results. The truth about Natalia's death was no longer an abstract suspicion whispered in hospital corridors, it was written plainly in black and white, undeniable and piercing. As much as it devastated him, it was Marco's pain that truly broke him. Watching the man he loved drown in grief over the mysterious loss of his mother had become unbearable. The unanswered questions, the conspiracy theories swirling around Sonny's possible involvement, and the silence from the Corinthos circle made it clear that this was not just a personal tragedy, it was a battle between justice and protection, between what was right and what was easy. Lucas knew Carly. He knew how fiercely she would fight for Sonny, how she would use her influence, her instincts, and even deception if it meant keeping Sonny safe. That loyalty, once admirable, now threatened to obstruct a fragile truth that Marco desperately needed. In the past, Lucas might have turned a blind eye, swallowed his doubts, and let his family handle things their way. But this time, the cost was too personal. This time, there was a real victim, and the wound left behind was too deep. For Marco's sake, Lucas had to draw a line, one that Carly could not cross. He made it clear to her that he would not stand by and watch her meddle with the investigation. He wasn't trying to take sides, he simply believed that the truth had to be allowed to come out without interference. If Sonny was innocent, the facts would show it. There was no need for backdoor maneuvers or whispered meetings with lawyers and detectives. Every time someone tampered with justice under the guise of loyalty, people like Marco were the ones left in the wreckage. Lucas couldn't let that happen again, not to the man he loved, not to anyone else. Lucas's confrontation with Carly wasn't just about justice, it was about dignity. He saw in Marco a silent strength that refused to crumble, even as his world fell apart. That resilience inspired Lucas to stop being passive and finally use his voice. Telling Carly to back off wasn't an act of betrayal, it was a plea for compassion. A plea for truth. A plea to let Marco grieve with clarity, not confusion. He didn't want revenge or retribution. He wanted peace, for Marco, for Natalia, and even for Carly, though she didn't realize it yet. As the weight of his decision settled in, Lucas realized this was a turning point. For years, he had lived in the shadows of stronger personalities, often deferring to the will of others. But now, faced with the raw agony of Marco and the cloud of doubt over Natalia's death, he found the courage to speak plainly. He could no longer be a silent bystander to the kind of justice that only protected a chosen few. His love for Marco demanded something more, something honest, even if it risked his relationship with Carly. In the end, Lucas wasn't asking for Carly's understanding, only her restraint. If Sonny truly had nothing to hide, then she had no reason to intervene. But if there was something buried beneath layers of loyalty and secrecy, then it was time for it to come to light. Lucas chose to believe in truth, in healing, and in love, not the kind that hides behind protection, but the kind that faces pain head-on. And as he stood by Marco's side, he knew he had made the right choice, even if it came at the cost of old alliances. Second, Michael tried to stay calm, but his heart was pounding with fear. Sasha was inconsolable, her entire body trembling as she clutched Daisy's favorite toy in her hands, eyes wild with panic and pain. The disappearance of their daughter was every parent's worst nightmare, and now it had become their terrifying reality. Michael's own grief and terror threatened to break through his composed exterior, but he knew that if he fell apart, it would only make things worse. Sasha needed him to be strong. Daisy needed him to think clearly. So, with every ounce of willpower, he steadied his voice and gently urged Sasha to take a breath, to hold on, to trust that they would find their daughter. Sasha, however, was spiraling into despair. Her sobs echoed through the room, her words tangled in guilt and fear. She blamed herself for letting go of Daisy's hand for even a moment. She blamed the world for its cruelty. Every second without knowing where Daisy was felt like an eternity. Michael held her close, even as his own mind raced with horrible possibilities. He couldn't let those thoughts consume him. Instead, he focused on what needed to be done. He needed answers, and he needed help. Without wasting another moment, he contacted the authorities and gave them every detail, what Daisy had been wearing, where they had last seen her, and the slightest clues that might matter. As news of Daisy's disappearance spread, the entire community of Port Charles responded with urgency. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers joined the search, their hearts heavy with worry. The police launched a formal investigation, and detectives promised to mobilize every available resource. Still, the hours felt unbearably long. Sasha sat in silence now, tears streaming down her face, her body shaking with exhaustion and dread. Michael stayed by her side, never letting go of her hand, repeating over and over that they would find Daisy, that she was strong, that she would come home. Though his words were meant to comfort Sasha, they were also a desperate prayer. Michael tried to push down the rising panic, tried to be the voice of reason when every instinct inside him was screaming. He couldn't show weakness. Not now. Sasha needed stability. Daisy needed to know that her parents were looking for her, fighting for her. With every passing minute, Michael's protective instincts grew sharper. He was determined to follow every lead, speak to every witness, and turn over every stone until his little girl was safe in his arms again. Others gathered, too. Willow, Carly, Jason, and even Sunny offered support, shocked by the news and eager to help. For once, all differences were set aside. The priority was clear: bring Daisy home. There was a quiet understanding among them that the moment called for unity, not blame. No one could afford to waste time on anything else. Hope became the fragile thread holding them all together. Every phone call made, every street searched, every camera checked, it all fed into that hope. In the center of it all, Michael remained a steady force. His love for Daisy was boundless, and his resolve was absolute. As Sasha wept quietly beside him, drained from fear and grief, Michael refused to give up. Somewhere out there, their daughter was waiting. And until the moment they held her again, he would not rest. He would fight with everything he had, for Sasha, for Daisy, and for the chance to put their shattered family back together. Third, Felicia approached Curtis with a somber urgency in her voice, knowing the gravity of what she was about to reveal. She had just received confirmation that Daisy had gone missing under mysterious circumstances, and the tension gripping Port Charles was reaching a fever pitch. Everyone close to the situation was overwhelmed with anxiety, and Felicia knew Curtis needed to be brought up to speed immediately. As she laid out the facts, she emphasized the strangeness of Daisy's disappearance: no signs of forced entry, no ransom demands, and no clear witnesses. The child had seemingly vanished into thin air, and with each passing hour, the fear grew deeper. But what truly troubled Felicia wasn't just the disappearance itself. It was the undercurrent of hostility that had already begun to shape the investigation. She pointed out that Drew and Willow, despite their public civility, had long harbored deep resentment toward Michael and Sasha. Their falling out had been quietly brewing for months, fueled by buried jealousy, betrayal, and differences in ideology about family and loyalty. Now, with Daisy gone, that unresolved tension had evolved into something far more dangerous. Whispers were circulating through law enforcement and within the hospital. Some were speculating that Drew and Willow might be involved, or at the very least, knew more than they were saying. Curtis was visibly taken aback. Though he was no stranger to betrayal or complex family dynamics, the idea that Drew and Willow, especially Willow, could be implicated in something as dark as a child's disappearance felt almost unthinkable. But Felicia's tone was not speculative. It was cautious, deliberate, and supported by a pattern she had been quietly observing: the way Drew had recently tried to discredit Michael in court, the icy distance between Willow and Sasha, and the strange behavior both had exhibited in the days leading up to Daisy's disappearance. Nothing was conclusive, but Felicia was rarely wrong when it came to reading between the lines. Driven by a sense of responsibility and personal urgency, Curtis moved quickly. He knew he couldn't rely solely on official channels. The truth, as he had learned time and again, was often buried beneath polished statements and false alibis. He reached out to his network of contacts, former detectives, digital surveillance experts, and private informants, and began piecing together a timeline. He reviewed Daisy's last known whereabouts, questioned people who had been near the area, and quietly began cross-referencing Drew and Willow's recent movements. The deeper he dug, the more inconsistencies he found. Curtis wasn't ready to accuse anyone without evidence, but he understood that time was of the essence. Daisy's life could depend on how fast the truth surfaced. And if someone close to Michael and Sasha, especially someone once trusted like Drew or Willow, was manipulating the situation or hiding vital information, then Curtis would stop at nothing to expose it. His loyalty wasn't to sides, it was to the truth. And right now, the truth was murky, tangled in a web of secrets, resentment, and silent rivalries. As night fell and the investigation stretched into its next phase, Curtis felt the weight of the mission settle heavily on his shoulders. Felicia's instincts had sparked a fire he couldn't ignore, and now, with Daisy still missing, the clock was ticking faster than ever. Curtis vowed to uncover what no one else dared to admit. That someone within their own circle might be responsible for a child's disappearance. And he would follow every lead, no matter where it took him, until Daisy was found. Fourth, Drew's tone was firm but laced with a quiet urgency as he confronted Willow in the dimly lit hallway of the hospital. The news of Daisy's disappearance had sent shockwaves through Port Charles, and though Willow's first instinct was to act immediately, to seize the moment and demand custody of Amelia and Wiley, Drew understood that the emotional storm clouding her judgment could lead to irreversible consequences. He had watched her pace in growing frustration, her eyes burning with a mix of maternal fury and desperation. To her, Daisy's disappearance wasn't just a tragedy, it was a confirmation of everything she had feared about Michael's ability to protect their children. But Drew knew that impulse was a dangerous counselor. As Willow prepared to storm over to Michael's home and demand her children back, Drew stepped in with a warning. He reminded her that while the chaos surrounding Daisy was disturbing, any action taken without strategy or legal grounding could backfire. Willow had spent months carefully building a case, presenting herself as the more stable, consistent parent. One rash move now, one emotional outburst, could unravel all of that progress. The court would scrutinize not only Michael's household but also Willow's own reaction to this crisis. Drew pointed out what was becoming increasingly obvious: the environment Michael had created, regardless of intention, had become unstable. The disappearance of a child connected to his household, even if indirectly, painted a picture that couldn't be ignored. From Drew's perspective, this tragedy was not only heartbreaking, it was an opportunity. A terrible, painful opportunity, but one that might finally sway the court in Willow's favor. The judge, already wary of Michael's ties to dangerous figures and past behavior, would have no choice but to reevaluate the safety of his home. Still, Drew urged restraint. The court system moved with deliberation, and any appearance of emotional recklessness on Willow's part would give Michael ammunition to paint her as unfit or unstable. Drew knew Michael well enough to understand that he would seize on any misstep to regain the upper hand. So instead of rushing into confrontation, Drew advised Willow to let the system work, this time, with momentum finally shifting toward their side. He emphasized that patience wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And strategy, not rage, would bring her children home. Willow, still visibly shaken, absorbed Drew's words with silent intensity. Her mother's heart screamed for immediate action, but her mind, slowly, began to grasp the importance of timing. She realized that Daisy's disappearance had changed the landscape, not just emotionally but legally. For so long, she had feared that her credibility would never match Michael's influence. But now, with the community in shock and questions swirling about safety and responsibility, the narrative had shifted. And in that shift, Drew saw the path forward. Not through confrontation, but through quiet, decisive leverage. As they left the hospital together, Drew placed a steady hand on Willow's shoulder, grounding her. He knew the coming days would be filled with scrutiny, sorrow, and still more questions. But he also knew they could no longer afford emotional chaos. Everything had to be calculated, deliberate, and rooted in the undeniable fact that Michael's world was no longer safe for children. And if the court needed a final reason to rule in Willow's favor, it had just arrived, wrapped in fear, silence, and the haunting absence of a little girl named Daisy. Finally, Elizabeth had grown accustomed to the quiet ache of loneliness that settled in after Lucky's departure. It wasn't sudden or dramatic, just a slow, hollowing absence that made the house feel too large, the nights too long. She filled the space with work, with her children, with routine. But the emptiness lingered beneath the surface, and Rick seemed to sense it. When he extended the invitation for dinner under the pretense of discussing the car accident involving Christina, Elizabeth was cautious, but not entirely surprised. Rick had always been a man who knew when to insert himself, especially when she was vulnerable. The way he framed the invitation, with a veneer of concern and legal necessity, was classic Rick. It wasn't just about the case. It never was. As they sat across from each other at the quiet bistro tucked away on the outskirts of town, Elizabeth could feel the familiarity in Rick's gaze, the way he studied her as if trying to unlock something buried between them. He brought up Christina's car accident with a lawyer's precision, gently nudging her to testify about what she had seen and heard. But as the conversation unfolded, it became increasingly clear that Rick's interest wasn't solely in justice, it was in Elizabeth herself. He reminisced about old times, subtly hinted at shared history, and leaned into the emotional gaps left behind by Lucky's absence. Elizabeth, however, was not the woman she had been when they were together. She recognized the manipulation, the calculated way Rick blurred personal and professional boundaries. What unsettled her more than Rick's persistence was the ambiguity surrounding his relationship with Ava. The town had long speculated about their connection. Was it romantic, strategic, or simply transactional? Rick never clarified, and Elizabeth found his silence suspicious. If Rick was trying to rekindle something with her, why did he still orbit around Ava? Elizabeth didn't like being drawn into murky territory, especially when it involved two of the most unpredictable people in Port Charles. She refused to be a pawn in Rick's convoluted games, especially when those games might involve protecting Ava or exploiting Christina's recent scandal. Though Rick tried to present himself as the voice of reason, Elizabeth could sense the undertone of opportunism. He spoke of helping Christina navigate the legal fallout of the accident, but Elizabeth knew better than to trust Rick's motivations. He had always used the misfortunes of others as leverage, cloaking self-interest in faux concern. And while she sympathized with Christina, clearly reeling from guilt and the weight of public scrutiny, Elizabeth didn't want to be the one dragged into a situation that would inevitably spiral into drama. She had built a fragile peace in her life, and Rick's involvement threatened to shatter it. Elizabeth made her stance clear without theatrics or confrontation. She thanked Rick for dinner but declined to involve herself further in the case. She would not testify on something she had no desire to dissect, especially when it implicated Christina in a situation that should be handled by the appropriate authorities. More importantly, she would not give Rick any false hope of reconciliation. The past was just that, the past. And while she may have once loved him, she no longer saw him as a man who brought stability or comfort. He was a shadow from another time, trying to insert himself into a life that no longer had space for him. As she left the restaurant, Elizabeth felt a renewed sense of clarity. She didn't need Rick's companionship or his thinly veiled affection. She didn't want to be pulled into Ava's orbit or become entangled in Christina's mistakes. All she wanted was peace, and she was willing to keep her distance from anyone who threatened that, especially Rick. As Elizabeth walked away from the dinner with Rick, she felt a sense of finality settle over her. It wasn't anger or frustration that she felt, but a calm assurance that she had made the right choice. The invitation to get involved in the case had been nothing more than an opportunity for Rick to reinsert himself into her life, and she wasn't willing to let that happen. She understood the importance of boundaries now more than ever, especially with the complicated web of emotions surrounding Rick, Ava, and Christina. Elizabeth knew that to protect the fragile peace she had fought so hard to rebuild, she had to stay clear of any further entanglements, no matter how much Rick tried to pull her back into his orbit. Though the house felt quiet and empty when she returned, Elizabeth didn't feel the sting of loneliness as she once had. There was comfort in knowing that she was no longer letting others dictate the course of her life. She was free to focus on what truly mattered. Her children, her own healing, and the space she needed to reclaim her strength. Elizabeth had come a long way from the woman she had been when Rick was in her life, and now, with a clear heart and steady resolve, she was determined to keep moving forward, no matter how much others tried to pull her into the past.